Let's just dive right into this. Welcome to the Explainer. Now, if you've ever looked at the Companies Act and immediately thought of it as just some dry, dense legal textbook, well, you are definitely in the right place, because we're about to completely flip that perspective. Today, we're actually translating those rigid legal statutes into a living, breathing framework for audit risk. Because honestly, understanding this law, it isn't just for the lawyers. It is literally the absolute lifeblood of an effective audit and real stakeholder protection. So here is our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with the legal anchor, move into management and regulation, cover assurance and reporting, break down the core auditing connection, and finally wrap up with a real-world audit scenario. All right, Section 1, the legal anchor. Let's look at exactly why the Act matters so much to us as auditors. And we've got to start with the core thesis of this whole explainer, which is simply this: non-compliance equals audit risk, period. As auditors, you know we aren't just sitting around checking math. We are constantly assessing compliance. Why? Well, because every single legal breach a company makes directly spikes the risk of a material misstatement. If management is out there breaking the rules of the Act, the entirety of their entire financial statement is instantly called into question. Moving on to Section 2, management and regulation, or what we like to call the inputs. So let's look at the crucial audit link here. Section 76 of the Act strictly dictates management's fiduciary duties, right? Meaning, they absolutely have to act with care, skill, and good faith. Now, on the flip side, we as auditors are essentially forced to rely on the internal controls that this very same management team designs. Think about that for a second. If management is already failing in their basic fiduciary duties, there's absolutely no way we can trust the internal controls they've built. Weak management directly skyrockets our audit risk, and it basically forces us to completely rethink our testing procedures. But hey, it goes way beyond just fiduciary duties. Let's take Section 22, which strictly prohibits reckless trading. Regulatory rules like this mean auditors constantly have to scan the horizon. And the reason is, if a company is out there trading recklessly, they're going to face massive fines, brutal litigation, or even forced closure. That kind of stuff can financially cripple a company overnight, creating a massive going concern risk and completely distorting those financials. So when these regulatory breaches happen, our audit risk just shoots through the roof, and we have to seriously expand our testing. Plus, any significant breaches, we have to escalate and communicate those straight to the governance bodies. Okay, Section 3, assurance and reporting. Now we're looking at the outputs. Now, what's really interesting here is how the Act actually uses a mathematical formula, the public interest score, to dictate the exact level of assurance a company legally needs. It basically calculates a company's economic and social significance by looking at things like turnover and workforce size. If that score is over 350, boom, a rigorous external audit is mandatory to provide reasonable assurance. But if the score is lower, the law might only require an independent review, which really just offers a limited assurance. So the law is literally categorizing risk to tell us exactly what our professional involvement needs to be. It's a total game changer. And when it finally comes time to report, the Act draws a really clear line in the sand. Under Sections 29 and 30, the directors bear this heavy legal burden to prepare the financials. They have to present them fairly and without any misleading information. However, the auditor holds the ultimate responsibility for the final deliverable, which is the audit opinion. It's our job to test the accuracy, the completeness, and the fairness of those reports, because make no mistake, any misreporting by management leads directly to a modified audit opinion from us. Let's shift gears to Section 4, the core auditing connection, focusing on the auditor's cognitive process. Let's move to and see how this actually builds into a concrete methodology. First, we have to fully understand the Act's requirements. Second, we identify the specific risks of noncompliance. Third, we assess exactly how that impacts our overall audit risk. Fourth, we actively design targeted audit procedures, things like expanding our substantive testing. Fifth, we evaluate all the gathered evidence. And finally, step 6, we report our findings. It's literally taking dry legal theory and transforming it into our daily step-by-step audit action plan. But I really want you to think about this for a second. What happens when corporate governance just entirely fails? What happens when a company decides not to follow this beautiful legal framework we've just outlined?
Well, the reality is pretty dark, and the ripple effects are severe. Weak governance doesn't just look bad on a piece of paper, it actively breeds fraud. Without proper oversight, a company's internal controls just crumble, which drastically increases the risk of management overriding the system to do things like misstate inventory or artificially inflate revenue. And for us, as the auditor, that means modifying our audit opinions And worse, it triggers a mandatory obligation to report these reportable irregularities straight to the regulator, the IRBA.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 5, a real-world audit scenario. Let's look at the Fashela Ltd case. Picture this scenario. Fashela Ltd is rapidly expanding into developing markets that are notoriously known for corrupt business practices. We're talking customs officials actively demanding kickbacks. Yet, incredibly, the board of directors decided they just didn't need to create a separate risk or audit committee to oversee this massive expansion. As an auditor walking into this combination of a high-risk operational environment paired with a glaring lack of governance oversight is an absolutely massive blinking red flag. And here is the inevitable result of that weak governance environment. Jane Bigg, a senior sales manager at Fashela, actually gave this exact instruction to her subordinate: process additional sales onto the system immediately before year-end in order to inflate the sales and revenue streams. Guys, that is a blatant instruction to commit fraud, purely to secure management bonuses at year-end. This is the ultimate consequence of a board failing to establish robust oversight and a real culture of compliance. So what exactly is our audit response here? Well, we go right back to our framework. First, identify the breach. Management is clearly violating their Section 76 fiduciary duties and engaging in Section 22 reckless trading. Next, assess the risk. There is an incredibly high risk of material misstatement here due to management override. Then, design procedures. Since we obviously can't trust their systems, we have to heavily expand our substantive manual testing specifically on year-end sales and inventory. And finally, report. We have to escalate this fraud straight to the audit committee and formally report the irregularity to the IRBA. This whole scenario brilliantly illustrates the entire point of our explainer today. The Companies Act isn't just some chained-up textbook you're supposed to memorize. It's a strategic chessboard. It is the very lens through which we have to view risk. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to take into every single engagement you do. When you read a piece of corporate legislation, don't just ask yourself, what does it say? You need to ask, how does this exact legal requirement change my audit plan? Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll catch you next time.